Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced an agreement with BC's provincial government to offer $10 a day childcare support for children under 6. The agreement over the next 5 years. The initiative was revealed at a joint news conference with Premier John Horgan. BC is the first province to sign on to the Liberal offer laid out in the April budget. Here's the Prime Minister on the new plan.
For people with young kids, this is huge. As part of the agreement in the next 5 years, we'll work with the provincial government to achieve an average of $10 a day childcare for all regulated spaces for kids under 6. Also in the next 5 years, 30,000 new high-quality spaces will be created in British Columbia. This is real change you can count on. By the end of next year, the average childcare fees for BC parents will be cut in half, and there will be more than 12,000 $10 a day spaces available. To make all of this happen, we've worked incredibly hard with leaders within the government of British Columbia, which will fund critical services, grow a strong and skilled workforce of early childhood educators, and expand not-for-profit and public delivery of early learning and childcare.
The announcement with BC is part of the federal government's budget promise in April to provide $30 billion to the provinces and territories over the next 5 years if they sign on. The goal is to cut daycare fees in half over the next year and a half in any province that agrees and reduce the cost for parents to $10 a day by 2025-26. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is also in British Columbia today. He says he's skeptical Justin Trudeau will follow through.
So we need to invest in childcare, and I want to see that happen. And I'm excited to see that happen. And if Justin Trudeau is serious about this, you can count on my support to make sure we move forward in delivering more childcare to more Canadians across this country. But if he doesn't, and if he goes to an election, again, this is another example of Justin Trudeau being all for show. Just like he ran a campaign in 2019 on universal pharmacare, talked about it in the throne speech, made a commitment, and then we brought forward legislation based on his own commissioned report that he voted against. We brought forward legislation that was completely in line with what his own government commissioned a report and found that that was the step forward, and he voted against that, really saying it was all for show.
All right. Is this really the beginning of a comprehensive, affordable childcare plan for families in Canada? What about the rest of the country? My next guest has been working on getting a national childcare plan for decades. Morna Ballantyne is the executive director of Childcare Now. It's a national childcare advocacy organization. Morna, welcome to the Rundown.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been studying this, advocating this for a very long time. What's your sense? Is this truly the beginning of a national daycare plan for families in Canada, or just for show?
I don't think it's for show, not at all. What we saw in the last federal budget was an enormous financial commitment, which I believe, signaled to everybody that the federal government was finally going to step up and play a really strong leadership role and use what we call the federal spending power to win agreements with provinces and territories to together build the kind of childcare system that families have been waiting for a very long time. And also, I would say, employers and businesses and so many for the system to happen. So no, it's not show, it's happening. And this first agreement between the Government of Canada and the BC government shows that the provinces are willing to step up, join with the federal government. So I think we are on our way.
What do provinces have to do to get this federal funding?
They essentially, to get the federal funding, have to sit down at a negotiation table with the federal government and hammer out the kind of agreement that was announced today. Now, we haven't seen all the fine print, but we know some of the highlights. And what that agreement says is that together, both levels of government are committing to making early learning and childcare more affordable for parents, cutting fees by 50% by the end of 2022, bringing it down to an average of $10 a day for regardless of the age group or age of the child, which is huge, down to $10 a day at the end of 5 years, and also to expand licensed childcare so that more families, more children have access to them. And very importantly, this agreement has an element that speaks to addressing the working conditions and the compensation of early childhood educators, which is going to be a critical piece to recruiting new staff to the sector and retaining, very importantly, to retaining, because we're losing a lot of early childhood educators from the field simply because the pay is so poor. So all of those elements, and another extremely important element in this agreement that we know will be replicated because the federal government has made that commitment, and that's that all expansion, all new early learning and childcare services will be in the not-for-profit and the public sector.
Is this going to be expensive for the provinces?
The provinces do not have to spend any additional money than they're already spending on childcare in order to access the new federal funding. These agreements speak only or only require federal funds. However, what we did see in the agreement announced today, or there was some indication, although we're not exactly sure, we haven't figured out the exact numbers, but it looks like the British Columbia government is also going to be increasing its own investments in early learning and childcare. But the federal government has never made that a condition of the provinces and territories to receive the $30 billion of new money that was promised in the 2021 budget. So they don't have to put up money, but they do have to be willing.
Right. Alberta's premier, Ontario's premier, New Brunswick's premier have all said that, have all expressed concern. I mean, Alberta and Ontario saying, this doesn't work for us. We have unique circumstances. What are those unique circumstances?
You know, it's interesting because when you look at the provision of early learning and childcare across the country, it is very similar from one jurisdiction to the next. The only jurisdiction where there's some key differences is Quebec. And from a point of view of parents, of children, and the economy, the situation is very similar from province to province and in the territories. There's not enough of it. It's too expensive. And across the country, including in Quebec, the sector is having a lot of trouble recruiting and retaining early childhood educators. So this framework agreement works across the country. It should work across the country. Again, the provinces and territories don't have to increase their own spending to be able to achieve the objectives that the federal government has set out. So there really is no reason for any province or any territory not to go to the table, work these things out with the federal government so that the system can be built well beyond BC and across the country.
Very quickly, we're over time, but just an indication, I'm sure everybody's wondering, why would Alberta and Ontario not be opposed to this? Why would they not want to? There are probably two things. One is probably just, turf. That's always an issue in areas of provincial jurisdiction, the extent to which the provinces want a federal government to say what kind of, how the money should be spent or what the goals and objectives would be. And the other is, once we are down this road, building and expanding the early learning and childcare system that everybody wants and that the economy needs, there probably are concerned that, there will be additional spending required in the future. But populations grow in the future and economies grow, especially if there's early learning and childcare. So even that should not be a worry for either province. In fact, both provinces' economies could really do with early learning and childcare. Mona, thank you.
Thanks so much.